So hello everyone. Thank you for your coming. Today's talk by Dr. KIUCHI. I'm very happy to can invite today Dr. KIUCHI for this talk today. And KIUCHI has got his PhD from the Nanja University just this March, so he's very still hot the bread, just baked. So, and he has graduated he got the master degrees from the Waseda University, and his major was the Western history. And he entered the Nanja University, the doctor course, and he had written a very good dissertation on John Henry Newman. John Henry Newman was a very famous figure in Church of England in the 19th century. And as you know, he has converted to Catholics and then he became cardinal. So his thinking and his life has been studied variously. And especially in Japan, he is accepted as some kind of saint, some kind of the model for the Christian faith. And Dr. KIUCHI's dissertation was about John Newman's activities through the journalism at that time. So I think he could create some new field of these Newman studies. And I hope then his studies can be developed in the world and also in Japan. So today, he will talk about a history of Anglo-Japanese relation in the field of Catholicism, a Japanese reception of John Henry Newman sought by Yoshimitsu Yoshihiko. So Yoshimitsu Yoshihiko is also one of very important persons in the Japanese Catholic, and especially the 20th century. So there are also many studies on Yoshimitsu Yoshihiko. So I think today's talk by Dr. KIUCHI on this relation between John Henry Newman and Yoshimitsu Yoshihiko will give us some new insight how Japan has accepted the theological thought of John Henry Newman, and maybe whether or not Yoshimitsu Yoshihiko has understood or misunderstood in various way of thinking. So that was my introduction. Dr. KIUCHI, and then we will hear his talk today. So I think we have about 50 or 40 or 50 minutes for his talk, and then after that we will have time for discussion. So now, let me, Dr. KIUCHI, please.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be able to talk to you today. And I'd like to thank you, NIRC and Kim Sensei, for allowing me to speak today. First, I'd like to make a short self-introduction. My name is Shō KIUCHI, and I study mainly the thought of John Henry Newman and liberal Catholics, and the media they use. And my major is history of Catholicism in modern Britain, but I also study Catholicism in Japan in 20th century, especially the reception process of Newman and interreligious dialogue by Japanese Catholic intellectuals. In this presentation, I analyze the influence of John Henry Newman, English saint, on Yoshimitsu Yoshihiko, prominent theologian, who strongly influenced Japanese Catholic intellectuals. In the process, I pay attention not only to elements of Newman's thought that Yoshimitsu received, but also to those that were not received by Yoshimitsu. And I consider why he chose such elements and why he rejected some elements. As I discussed later, considering the elements Yoshimitsu did not accept is essential to understanding the influence Newman had on him, because he did not receive the sort of Newman systematically, but selected and moved for focus of it strategically. The process of this presentation is like that. First, I talk on background of this presentation, who is Yoshimitsu and who is Newman. And next, I talk on research questions and the meaning of this study. After that, I review the previous studies and show the aim of this examination. Next, I talk about Yoshimitsu's acceptance of Newman. That is, how Yoshimitsu apologized for his conversion by using Newman, and what he talked about or not in 100th anniversary of the Oxford movement. Lastly, I show the conclusion and the prospects. First, to explain the background, I summarize the life of Newman and Yoshimitsu, and put the various topics in order. So I talk about Newman. First, I discuss his career, and next, the problem of accepting his thought. Newman was a famous English theologian. He was educated at Oxford University and ordained as a priest in 1827. Originally, he started his career as an Anglican theologian and a fellow of the college in Oxford. After 1833, Newman's influence power got more vigorous, for he acted as a leader of the Oxford movement, a Reformation movement of the Anglican Church. There were many points in this movement, but I think the critical points on the theme are below. First, the Catholicity in the Anglican Church. And second, apostolic succession is how their church received. Apostolic succession is succession. And the third and the most important point is the criticism of Erastianism. Erastianism is the doctrine that the state should have supremacy over the church in the ecclesiastical matters. And it has been used to justify government's intervention to the Anglican Church. On this topic, I mentioned later. At the end of the movement, Newman got into trouble with bishops who tended to be evangelical because he stressed Catholicity and access to the Catholic Church. Finally, he concluded that the tradition of the Apostle Church was mainly preserved in Catholic Church, and he converted to the Catholic Church in 1845. And after he got into Catholic Church, he engaged in many projects to improve the position of Catholics in England, such as founding Catholic University in Ireland, the reformating the Catholic periodical named the Rambler, or apologize for converts from Church of England to the Catholic Church, including himself, and make conversation with William Gladstone. But his unique thought and non-scholastic methods were not understood correctly, and he stimulated the authority. Though he was nominated the cardinal by Pope Leo XIII in 1879, under the long reign of Pius IX and ultramontanists, he had been suppressed for a long time and misunderstood. And after his death, modernists who tried to harmonize the modern science and the doctrine of Catholic Church, such as Henry Newman or Friedrich von Hugel, used Newman's text, and they use Newman's text to support their claim. So, for a brief period, Newman was misunderstood as if his thought was the source of modernism. But the eve of the Second Vatican Council, he rediscovered, and the Renaissance happened. Well, that's right. Next, I discuss the problem of acceptance of Newman's thought. As I discussed, many readers misunderstood Newman. The main reason why they misunderstood him was that most of his texts were written as a response to conversation or impeachment, so to protect him or the Catholic Church. So there were lack of system or coherency. So if one reads his text without referring social and historical context, the reader can easily misunderstand him and make very hermeneutic interpretation. But in this presentation, I do not intend to point out the misunderstanding or insufficient understanding or correct them. Rather, I'd like to stress the question whether one read Newman correct or not is not important to study of history of acceptance. The theme I am interested in and analyze in this presentation is why they mislead Newman intentionally or unintentionally, and why they skipped or tortured some aspects of Newman's thought, and what they want to insist by using the text and name of Newman. I choose Yoshimitsu Yoshihiko, the acceptance of Newman's thought, as a case study of this. Next, I talk on who is Yoshimitsu Yoshihiko. Yoshimitsu Yoshihiko is a Japanese theologian who had strong influence over Catholic intellectuals of pre-war generation. Originally, he was educated in the first higher school, the most old number school in Japan, and most of whose students went to Tokyo Imperial University. When he was a student, he got acquainted with Uchimura Kanzo, a leader of non-church movement, and became a pupil of him. Yoshimitsu was engaged in the movement by the influence of Uchimura. Non-church movement was a unique Christian group which do not admit the need of sacrament, including a baptism. But by Iwashita Soichi, a Catholic priest, he converted to the Catholic Church, like Newman. Convert from Uchimura's group to the Catholic Church has a strong influence in the Catholic Church. And among them, Yoshimitsu was one of the leaders of Catholic intellectuals in 1930s to 40s. After conversion, he studied in France under Jacques Maritain. Maritain was a philosopher of Neo-Thomism. Maritain's theory was the base of philosophy of Yoshimitsu. After returning to Japan, Yoshimitsu became a teacher of Sophia University and acted as a leader of Catholic intellectuals. Not only the lecture and study in university, but also missionary work for students was needed for him. For the work, he worked as an administrator of dormitory of Saint Filippo, which run by Iwashita, and contributed many articles to Catholic periodicals, such as Poe or Catholic Kenkyu, and play important role in introducing the new theology to Japan and increasing the number of intellectuals in the Catholic Church. Those who are educated by Yoshimitsu or influenced by him enjoy strong influence over the after-war society, such as Endo Shusaku, a famous Catholic novelist, and Tanaka Kotaro, a Ministry of Education, and later Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. Until here, I made a general view of the background, which was needed as an assumption of the survey of Yoshimitsu's acceptance of Newman. Next, I show my research question, which will be given some answer in my presentation. My main question is that, how did Yoshimitsu read Newman? And more importantly, how he could not read or did not read intentionally? From this question, the next question is derived. That is, why were some elements of Newman's thought not accepted by Yoshimitsu? Then what can we understand from the fact that Yoshimitsu selected Newman's thought and neglected some elements? I think that his selection and understanding itself is the objection of the examination. Mainly, I focus to answer these questions. Mainly, I focus on the text on Newman, written by Yoshimitsu in 1930s. There are two reasons why I think so. The first reason is that most of his texts on Newman were written in the 1930s. The second reason is that in 1933, the 100th anniversary of Oxford movement was held by both Catholics and Anglicans in Japan. So many Christians in Japan paid attention to Newman in this timing. 1933, Yoshimitsu gave a lecture titled Newman's The Idea of University and the Contemporary Philosophy. The lecture was published as a part of Yoshimitsu's first book, Catholicism, Thomas and Newman. Same year, the System of Newman's Religious Thought, edited by Erich Hipschwaller, Jesuit, was translated to Japanese by Sugita Eiichi, and Yoshimitsu contributed a long preface to the book titled The Essence of Newman's Piety. Well, I'd like to argue that 1930s is the best period to analyze the acceptance of reception of Newman, because the period is the time the spirit of Newman and Oxford movement was mostly needed. In Japan, that was the era. The era was the start point of the rise of nationalism and statism and compulsion of state Shintoism, where Newman discovered Newman's discourse on liberty of conscience and anti-statism, anti-Erastianism, and the discussion on the relationship between church and state to exclude state intervention were needed in this period. And the anniversary was held. So what Yoshimitsu did in the age in which the spirit of Oxford movement and Newman was needed. Next, I'd like to try to show the meaning of this presentation. There are three meanings of value, I think. The first is that my study is not on the doctrine, but the historical study focuses on the reception of the theory. In Japan, most of previous studies focus on the doctrine itself, but I do not doctrine itself, but how the doctrine was received or read. And the second is to examine the limitation of Japanese Catholic intellectuals. Most previous study discussed how Yoshimitsu accepted Newman and how he emphasized Newman. But this study pay attention to what Yoshimitsu could not accept and why Newman's thought was not used effectively in 1930s Japan. And third, to illustrate Anglo-Japanese relation in the field of Catholicism, where this is my major is history, and the third point, I'm very interested in third point, because in Japan, for many years after Meiji era, most of the scholars who study British history use Britain as a model of modernity or modern capitalism or parliamentary politics. So most of scholars pay attention to Puritan revolution or liberalist in 19th century. So Catholic priests or Catholic intellectuals regard it as reactionary and they do not pay attention to them. But if the lack of if we do not pay attention to Catholic intellectuals and the relation them and Japan, the history we wrote may be the very one-sided story. So I think if the number of small, it is important to illustrate Anglo-Japanese relation in the field of Catholicism. Well, next, I'll review of some previous studies. I do not know the scholar who study relation of Yoshimitsu and Newman in England or United States. Maybe most of previous study is by Japanese. Well, on the acceptance of Newman, Nagakura Reiko and Uno Kei have write some books. And on Yoshimitsu, there are many previous studies. But on the study of Yoshimitsu, do not much pay attention to Newman itself, because the study is the study of Yoshimitsu, not the relation between Yoshimitsu and Newman. And next, I examine Yoshimitsu's text and action to analyze how Yoshimitsu received Newman and used Newman's discourse to support his action. For doing so, I analyzed his article titled My Conversion and his speech in 100th anniversary of Oxford Movement, detailed as given below. Firstly, I talk about his conversion. As I mentioned before, not only Yoshimitsu, but also Tanaka also converted from Uchimura's non-church movement to the Catholic Church. Antipathy to the converts and their apologia for an important topic to understand the history of Catholicism in modern Japan. But as far as I know, except Uno and Wakamatsu, no previous study pay attention to this topic. As a converted Catholic intellectuals, Yoshimitsu had two difficult tasks to do. The first was to explain the process of his conversion to Catholic, especially Catholic intellectuals and students. The second was to construct a phraseology for the conversation battle with Uchimura's group. The first task had much to do with Newman, so I talk on this topic, and I consider how Newman was used to solve this question. This is an article titled My Conversion, written in 1931. This text is very long, so I extract sentences which have something to do with Newman. I use this text later. I read the text. When I was tired of the subjectivity of Protestant and human-like sermons, I had no choice but to go to the Catholic Church. Objects of my consideration was the relation between Catholic Church and early Protestantism, or between the Catholic Church and the ancient Church. In those days, I found the sentences in Newman's Apologia and found them the same as I had them. The sentences were like below. Now, though I do not accept the new dogma, I felt the peace of my mind as if I reached a port after a struggle with the choppy wave. The age of individualism and subjectivity had been passed. Everywhere in our society, people need a dogma. In this extraction, Yoshimitsu mentioned Newman's autobiography, Apologia, and described his conversion as if it overlapped Newman's conversion. The phrase Yoshimitsu mentioned is not to be found in Apologia, so probably this is not extraction but some summation by Yoshimitsu. And to analyze Yoshimitsu's article, I'd like to explain the Apologia. Apologia is a religious autobiography written by Newman to argue back against the impeachment from Charles Kingsley, a religious professor of Cambridge University. In this book, Newman explains the process to conversion. In the explanation, Newman mentions his younger Oxford movement and conversion. Though he mentioned many topics, the main theme were on the Oxford movement, such as criticism of liberalism, criticism of theology, only based on the Bible, and the seek for apostolic succession. Especially, one should not overlook the criticism for Erastianism, for it was one of the reasons why he joined the movement. The process of conversion is like below. Newman emphasized with John Keble, an Anglican clergy who criticized the control of the state over the church. Though there were some different points, and Erastianism was the common of the participator of the movement. In the movement, Newman criticized the surplus of self-judgment in interpretation of the scripture and liberalism. And he sought the authority which guarantees the orthodoxy of judgment. Newman depends on the theory of branch, a high church theory, and Greek Orthodox, Anglican Church, and the Catholic Church as the church succeeds the apostolic authority. At last, he concluded that Catholic Church preserved the infallibility and entered into the church. Next, I consider how Yoshimitsu used Newman. I'd like to consider his article, my conversion. Yoshimitsu criticized the subjectivity and got interested in the relation between the ancient church and the Catholic Church. Both of Yoshimitsu and Newman seek apostolical succession. In addition, Yoshimitsu's choices were Catholic and Greek Orthodox. To sum up, Yoshimitsu took a serious view on apostolical succession and gave high evaluation to the Catholic Church and Greek Orthodox. At last, he forwarded to the Catholic Church. On subjectivity, Yoshimitsu regarded it as a feature of Protestant and criticized it. He compared subjectivity and individual liberalism as a road to skepticism and dogma as objective authority, and insists that the latter is needed, and he stressed the value of Catholic faith in modern era. Well, what I was talking about Yoshimitsu's conversion is next to completely overlap Newman's conversion. But what I want to stress here is neither the inner change of Yoshimitsu or his conversion was really like that of Newman or not. It is impossible to trace Yoshimitsu's change for the lack of historical sources. What I want to point out is Yoshimitsu followed Newman's narrative to apologize himself to Catholic intellectuals. But to do so, Yoshimitsu do not follow all elements of Newman. He intentionally avoided one element. That is anti-Erastianism movement. Yoshimitsu did not mention Erastianism. That is one of the most important reason why Newman joined the movement. And next, why I want to consider why he rejects and avoids this element by consider 100th anniversary of Oxford movement, where before analyzing this anniversary, I pay attention to social context. In 1930s, Japan is the era of crisis. In 1932, students of Sophia University refused salute to Yasukuni Shrine. And so the government withdrew of officer from the Sophia University. And the Catholic Church in Japan cannot resist the pressure of the government, and they changed its stance to Shinto. The Catholic some scholars criticize the change of the Catholic Church. For example, Professor Miyoshi, she argues that the Catholic Church was intervened by the Japanese government, and the Bishop Mori talked simply sophism. In 1930s, the Catholic Church lost its dependence by state intervention. So church and state, and how to protect the church from the state is the most important problem for the Catholic Church in this period. And under such pressure, the 100th anniversary of Oxford movement was held. In December 1933, the Catholic Student League held an event, and Yoshimitsu and Totsuka Bunkyo, Catholic clergy, and Leopold Ward, English clergy, and Nicholas Rogen, the professor of the Sophia University, gave speech. And in the ceremony, Yoshimitsu gave a speech titled Newman's Idea of Philosophy and Contemporary, Idea of University and the Contemporary Philosophy. In this speech, Yoshimitsu showed two topics. The topic is that why Newman should be read now, and how can we recover the order of knowledge. And in the first point is, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, the first topic is why Newman should be read now is important for my presentation, so I pay attention to this topic. But before that, I pay attention to what text Yoshimitsu used in this speech. He used Oxford University sermon and essay on development of Christian doctrine and the idea of university, and essay in aid of grammar of assent. All these books are major work of Newman, but he did not mention the letter for the Duke of Norfolk. This book is on the relation between the loyalty to the government and the liberal conscience. And maybe this is the most important book for Japanese Catholics in this time. But Yoshimitsu do not mention this. And he also do not mention apologia and anti-Erastianism movement. Next, I examine the text of the speech. In this speech, Yoshimitsu regards the contemporary era, the age of crisis of humanity. And he says that in such dangerous and harsh time, clear systematic thought is not needed. What needed in the age of crisis is the ethical and existential thought. For example, Dostoevsky or Kierkegaard. And he regards Augustine is a philosopher like that. So he has modern thought. And Newman also the philosopher and theologian like in such group. But Yoshimitsu do not do not value Dostoevsky and Kierkegaard, because Yoshimitsu says that if questioned subjectively, that is a road to the doubt, and one do not solve by doubt. But Yoshimitsu says that Newman questions subjectively, but he answers objectively with authority. So Newman can collaborate in a subjectivity and outer objectivity. So he can solve the danger and crisis of this era. But his understanding of Newman have some difficult point. The feature of Yoshimitsu's acceptance of Newman is like that. He accepts Newman on a micro level or to macro level, like a value of world or a philosophical point. So lack of social level. So Newman's thought on society, politics, and the relation between church and state was not accepted all in Yoshimitsu's thought. And so I consider, why did Yoshimitsu not accept thought on social and political level? I think there are two reasons why he could not and he did not Newman's social and political thought. The first reason is that the lack of moment of conflict with the secular state. At this point is mentioned by Hanzawa. In his text, unlike from Protestant theologians, he did not criticize the state itself. Of course, he criticized ultranationalism, but he did not criticize state intervention itself. And so we have to we have to pay attention to Yoshimitsu's social thought. Why he could not accept Newman's political and social thought. So the conclusion and prospect is that the Yoshimitsu's achievement is that Yoshimitsu introduced Newman's theology to Japanese Catholic intellectuals, and he explained Newman's thought existentially and pointed out his subjectivity. So this is like Newman's interpretations after Second Vatican Council. So his interpretation was very different from other theologians in the same age. But his understanding of Newman has many limitations. The first limitation is that Yoshimitsu could not offer theology or political theory that support Japanese Catholic in 1830s for lack of the social and political discussion. And he had very little sense of criticism on statism and ultranationalism of Japan. Of course, he against nationalism, but he's too optimistic about the expansion of the state. So for me, the next question I had to study for many years is, how did Yoshimitsu theorize the relation between Catholic Church and state? Yoshimitsu give a good evaluation in Mussolini or Portugal fascism. So I think I have to study whether he lack of social theory or he had some social theory, but that is too weak to struggle with the state. That's all. Thank you for listening to my presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kiuchi. I think your talk gave us some impression point that how the Japanese Catholics, Yoshimitsu Yoshihiko, understood or misunderstood with intention or without intention the theological thought John Henry Newman. Of course, the theological thought of John Henry Newman is so abundant, so it's not impossible to consensus summarize his thought, but you gave us some very big important point, I think. And also my interest was how Yoshimitsu could, or why he emphasized some the parts of this human thought in his time, the 1930s. So I just remember now this story between the Endo Shusaku and Yoshimitsu Yoshihiko. Endo Shusaku was at the time the student of this Keio University, the Department of French. And Yoshimitsu, he lived in the dormitory where Yoshimitsu was a professor at the Sophia University. He also was stayed together with the student there, and he gave sometimes talk to the students. But Endo said, Yoshimitsu was we have honored him, and he was very good teacher, but from time to time, I could not understand what he's saying. The difficult thing and could not understand was Yoshimitsu always emphasized the Japanese society have to go back to the Western the medieval age. That means the Yoshimitsu criticized especially the modern atheism or the subjectivity. And he said that all problems came from the atheism. The Western society lost the faith on God, so that was the origin of all problems that we have now in this modern age. So Yoshimitsu also attended the conversation at the time, the Kindai Chokoku, the overcome of this modernism. And at the time, he also repeated the opinions that we have to go back to the medieval age. And at the time, many scholars said the criticism or seem to not understand what he says. So I think his misunderstanding or his intentional misunderstanding of Newman is something to do with his idea that we have to go back to the golden age of the medieval age. Is my interpretation correct, or did I also misunderstood Yoshimitsu's understanding of John Newman?
Well, thank you for a very important and interesting question. Well, if I understand you correctly, you argue that Yoshimitsu's argument, return to the Middle Age, have something to do with his misunderstanding of Newman and his engagement of Kindai Chokoku. Well, I think that's right, I think, because as I mentioned in the presentation, Yoshimitsu is very optimistic to the state, and that has much to do with his medievalism. In the late of 18th century, the Holy See opens the paper titled Rerum Novarum. The Rerum what in English, where the new things. In Rerum Novarum is if usually people do not theology read that's good text, and they try to keep labels. But to read that correctly and correctly, that is so right in English, where that is not over the modern capitalism, but return to the so what Niven said in English?
Hierarchy system.
They try that is like revival of hierarchy system in early modern period, and do not crash the ruler system, but peasant honor the landlord, and landlord treated them kindly like that. So, but the thought is base of Italian fascism or Austrian fascism or Salazar system in Portugal. So the slogan, return to medieval age, escape modern crisis by using medieval idea is easily used by the state, fascist state. And Yoshimitsu is like that. He's not fascist, he's very good person, I think. But his statement is very useful for the people do not people try to crush the modern individualism or modern parliamentary politics. So that but he joined the kingdom overcoming modernity circle, and he himself do not intend to support the Japanese government. But apart from his intention, his theory is supported the authoritative and non-modern Japanese government, I think.
Did he also have some difficulties in that age? I mean, he has some troubles with the Japanese government at the time, or he is very good accepted by the Japanese government? What was the relation between him and the Japanese government at the time?
Maybe there's no relation, I think.
No relation.
Because he is only a professor of Sophia University and the philosophy teacher. So he do not have some post in Imperial University or he could not enjoy the power to the government like the professor of Kyoto Imperial University. So he is much different. His power is much different from Nishitani Keiji or Tanabe Hajime or other professors. So he did not have power. And I do not know whether the government think of him, but he do not go to the battle. So So, but his teacher Iwashita sometimes praise the Japanese government or the rule of Korea, Taiwan. So the conclusion is that he did not have power. So government do not pay so much attention to him, I think.
Okay, so please.
Can I ask a question of this? A question of my own ignorance. But I learned a lot from your talk about the way Catholicism was received in Japan in the 1930s. It's a very interesting time in Japan for various religious groups, and I've always been curious about how the Catholic Church dealt with, as you mentioned, some of the requirements of having to visit shrines. And my understanding is that the Catholic Church in Japan made some concessions so that they could continue in Japan. But one thing you mentioned about Yoshimitsu's, you were in your response to Professor Kim's question of this kind of wanting to overcome my modernity by looking to the past, and how that had some affinities with maybe fascist thought at the time.
Yeah.
Probably in Japan as well. You mentioned, Italian fascism and fascism in Europe. But I'm also wondering from his perspective, and maybe just I'm out of curiosity, if this is one reason that he borrows a lot from Newman, if this is some type of also criticism of Protestantism. I mean, Professor Kim mentioned overcoming modernity, but I'm wondering from a Catholic intellectual or a Catholic theologian perspective, that's also a subtle critique of Protestantism, especially individuality and the kind of elevation of capitalism. I mean, is that also a way that Catholics criticize Protestantism? Because that sounds like a critique of Protestantism to me. But I mean, what were his views about Protestantism in general?
Think very important question. So. I'm not exactly good at English, but if I understand you correctly, you pointed out the Yoshimitsu Newman's bad feeling to the modernity have something to do with bad feeling to Protestants.
It's kind of a polemic against Protestant arguments or Protestant thinkers. I mean, I don't know what his position about arguing against contemporary Protestant theologians are, or especially, Newman was coming from England and he was a convert, right? So I'm just wondering if a lot of the criticism of modernity or pointing out problems of modernity are also a polemic, a kind of Protestant versus Catholic polemic going on. I have no idea. I'm just curious about that.
Thank you very much. We have the difficult question. Well, I think Newman, in the case of Newman, his dislike feeling to the modernism maybe overlap with bad feeling to Protestant. But in this case, the word Protestant means Calvinist or Luther, and not Anglican Church. Because Newman hate modernity and hate Calvinism before he conversion to Catholic Church. He was a member of High Church movement. Conservative, he supported Conservative Party and attack liberal parties MP member of the parliament in the election. So before conversion, he disliked the modernity and some group of Protestants. And Yoshimitsu, where I do not know, but maybe Yoshimitsu do not have such high and such complex thought, because he do not have knowledge of modern economics or modern politics by his book. So but I don't know what Yoshimitsu think on Protestant and modernities, but he sometimes kept silent to Uchimura Kanzo's group. But that difficult. I don't know the reason. He like Protestant, or he accepts some point of Protestant and keep silent, or he like Uchimura as a person and keep silent. I don't know the reason. But for me, the interesting his book, his article on Johann R.W. Meller, German theologian. In that article, he do not use the name non-church movement, but actually that is a criticism for non-church movement, but also criticism for Catholic Church. Where Meller is a very unique theologian. He do not stress the hierarchy of the church, but try to explain church from the as Holy Spirit. So like Protestant. So Yoshimitsu prized him and used his theory and tried to his ecclesiology in 1941. So that's very, so maybe he has a very complex feeling to the Protestantism, I think.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. And generally at this time period, I'm curious because because slightly before this, the Meiji period, and there's such a boom of Protestant missionaries in Japan. I know this from Espen Peterson's book and his research. And then there was kind of a resurgence of Catholics in Japan, especially coming from based at Sophia. And so I didn't know if there was some type of, the kind of Christian Catholic versus Protestant theological and also social and cultural conflicts that shaped so much of European history were present in 1930s, or just because Japan was such a different context that, someone like Yoshimitsu, even though he's a Catholic, they find more affinity with Protestant ideas. I was just curious about that. Because when the Buddhists were always like, they would argue with each other, but then they would get together like, well, at least we're not the Christians. they would pit themselves against the Christians ideologically, but I didn't know about the Protestant Catholic relationships of the time. Thank you for your answer. Thank you.
Just to react maybe to remarks, I think that in the period of militaristic period, the majority of Catholic missionaries were actually missionaries from my society. So French missionaries, which were consequently forbidden the access to Japan because well, France was not allied with Japan in the elements of the Second World War. So maybe in that period, Protestantism was more, I mean, thriving in the country. I mean, with many missionaries, which could come maybe from countries which were not at war with Japan.
I think my question also comes from, I had a bit of a chutanaskachakuro in your talk, because I looked this up, I made this comment the other day. I didn't know if this John Henry Newman was the same Newman as the name of the Newman Center. So in the United States, at least in the US, maybe in Europe as well, universities, the kind of the Catholic educational centers, are all Newman centers.
Oh, yeah.
And so when I was a college student, one of my friends, he was Catholic and he worked at the center. So sometimes we would have these Protestant Catholic debates, and he would bring in, he was a big fan of Newman, but they would also offer events like this, a talk, and then they would invite students, especially Protestant students, because where I lived in the Midwest, Catholics were very much a minority. And so they would bribe us to come by giving us pizza. And then they would make us wait till the end of the talk. So we have to hear about Newman's theology, and then we get pizza. So it was kind of, I had a bit of a flashback.
Converts the Protestant to the Catholic Church.
Yeah, they were trying to convert us. With pizza. So I'm trying to remember we made a lot of jokes about like whether the pizza is like a form of transubstantiation to invite us into the church.
The question whether pizza worked or not.
It didn't work for me.
I think it's very interesting that the Yoshimitsu get into the church by way of this Uchibakanyo's thought. So, you know, the young scholars at the time, the elite at the time was converted into Christianity under the influence of the Uchimura Kanjo. But last of them left Uchimura Kanjo 3-4 years after 3-4 years. And there are many various reasons why they could not continue to work with the Uchimura Kanjo. But what was Yoshimitsu mentioned some reasons why he should leave Uchimura Kanjo. Did he left some memories or some notes on them?
Well, thank you. He do, as far as I know, he do not criticize Uchimura namely, but there's some discourse. Maybe it's intended to something which Uchimura's feeling, and he said non-church movement is too aggressive and too aggressive to other group, and too subjective.
Okay.
And too human-like. So if in his short essay, Yoshimitsu says that if the priest changes, the church is like completely different church. So that the Protestantism depends on person, not person, too personal, and depends on the individual persona. So is it Christianity? He criticizes that. But in the text, he do not use the name of this Uchimura. Yeah, and I do not know on Uchimura, but maybe his influential power is maybe based on the first high school, because he there and those who had sympathy to him worked as a teacher in the school. So after people leave the school, Uchimura's influential power may be decreased, I think.
Many young scholars at the time left Uchimura because Uchimura was too strong, strength. So he was too ethical. So they cannot follow. I cannot continue go with him. So that was one of the reasons they could not go with Uchimura anymore.
So sorry, but I'm very interested in the what in English contrast of Yoshimitsu and his group and Uchimura and his group in 1930s or 40s, where Uchimura the group of Uchimura do not lose their influential power and suppressed by the government. And after the war, most of the intellectuals who fought with the government and criticize the colonial rule. They are the people of Uchimura. Maybe such as Namba Shigeru or Yanagihara in Tokyo University. So afterward, their influential powers rapidly get stronger and stronger. But Yoshimitsu are forgotten. Because he did not register for the church, and what he is too complex and too difficult to understand. So after the war, only some scholars read Yoshimitsu, and as far as I know, the renaissance of Yoshimitsu studies only after 30 years. So not so long history, I think.
Yeah, well, I think in the context of post-war Japan, Uchimura's group and anyone who was persecuted by the Japanese government were immediately elevated. And I don't think anyone wanted to study anyone who might be considered a collaborator with the militaristic government. But I mean, Soka Gakkai, for example, is another example. Like after the war, they were the fact that they were so persecuted really boosted their profile or like their support. So maybe. So,
Is there any terms that we teach we can symbolically summarize the Yoshimitsu's attitude toward the Japanese government, for example, or Japan, for example. For example, we already know that the Uchimura is very famous for his term, the two J's, Japan and Jesus. So is there any such a term in Yoshimitsu that by which he summarized the relation between the Christianity and the Japan?
Well, Yoshimitsu often say something to the government, but that is private letter or talk with his pupil. And of course, there are some texts, but the text is too complex and too difficult. For example, the overcoming of modernity, Yoshimitsu talk on the attitude to the government, but he do not use the state or government. He uses the word spirit, and we have to enter the era of spirituality, and the spirituality is not East, not Japan, not France. That's a universal thing. So if one reads that very correctly, this is a criticism for ultranationalism. But one side he says that, but one side he often uses the word nation or nation, or the he plays the war. So maybe two-faced. He has two-faced, I think. So in the study of Yoshimitsu, it is not good to pay attention only his peaceful aspect, and he is a very good peaceful person. But also some in after WO2, some scholars pay attention only Yoshimitsu's bad aspect. He is too aggressive. That is also error. I think has to say both sides, and maybe most of the person who have something to do with Yoshimitsu may die or too old. So now we have the liberty to study Yoshimitsu both sides. So I think.
I mean, I noticed that on your first slide, you have Yoshimitsu's dates. So he died his dates are 1904 to 1945. So he was very young.
So, yeah.
So that may also explain why some of his points aren't very clear. He just didn't have enough time to clarify his points. Especially, I mean, 1945 is a very curious year to pass away in Japan. But do you know how did he die? Was it not health?
He had disease.
Yeah. So he didn't maybe have enough time to further develop his thoughts. So that's why there.
In this point, I think that the Tanaka Kotaro is very interesting. He also studied under Uchimura Kanzo and get friendship with Yoshimitsu. And in the war, maybe both of them have very similar idea. But Tanaka Kotaro lived very long, maybe 80 to very old. So he changed his idea. After war, he changed his idea completely. And once he was persecuted professor, but after the war, he stood on the side of the power. So very changed.
Yeah.
Please.
It's one question. Okay. Yeah, so you said not doctrine, but the doctrine accepted. You said that I'm interested in his doctrine, and Yoshimitsu, even Newman criticized about states, but Yoshimitsu didn't show the Japanese, and he also didn't help Japanese Catholic Church, and it might be intentionally, and how do you think it's only Japanese government's pressure, or how do you think do Yoshimitsu have some kinds of theological wrong point?
Think very interesting question. That's very important question. If Yoshimitsu has to act like this under the pressure of the government, so his theory is good and no problem. But if he acted like this, depending on his theory has some not good point. But I think that not for the pressure, but for his theory, he acted like this, because I think that in his theory, there do not have moment conflict with state or battle with the people who have power. His theory is one side too personal to existential, and one side too philosophical, not the level of society. One side too personal to philosophic, and do not have mentioned society, politics, economy. I think
Idealistic.
they're too idealistic. So most of the text his text, as far as I have read, most of his text is like that, too personal or too idealistic. But sorry, I forget the title. But in his the first he talked on the state and nation directly. But in that article, he think the cooperation, harmony with the state, economics, parliament, and the subject is important. But that is very similar to the sort of Mussolini. And in the article, Yoshimitsu praised the fascism in Austria. So maybe he gave pressure and he had to change the idea. Is not right. I think in his theory, in his theory, he has some not good points to that. He could not register the government by his theology because his theology do not have social aspect, I think. Thank you. So your question is very important, and I think that it's very important to examine and analyze the relation between Catholic intellectual and fascism in this era, because not whether by pressure they act like that, or by theory they act like that. If the latter, we have to criticize and rethinking their theory, I think. Like finding a problem.
That's just a question. How could or should we locate Yoshimitsu among the Catholic elite or scholars at the time in Japan?
Well, I think not he's very famous, but in short he's not mainline, because the main line of Catholic scholars in Japan is very sorry, what in English they accord with. That's similar to what they are is very similar to what the bishops are saying or Pope are saying, where they put value on hierarchy and try to conversation with Protestant. But Yoshimitsu's thought is very different from that. He do not put weight on higher church of hierarchy, but he repeatedly emphasized Church of Holy Spirit, and that is apart from the main line. More that as if he talked on the Church in the Second Vatican Council in some point, and he himself rejects modernism and modernists, and he always said, "I criticize modernism," but maybe he got influence from modernism, especially by Friedrich von Hegel and Andy Bremen, French modernists, because they write the book on Newman, and Yoshimitsu read that, and very progressive idea in some point. So maybe so very famous, but not main, I think.
I think it's very interesting because, as you said, he departed from the Uchimura's group because he criticized Uchimura's faith is too individualistic and to the emphasize to the subjectivity of the faith. So he want to go back to the apostolic succession, or he want to belong to this church, the authority. But on the other hand, he also emphasized the Church of the Holy Spirit, not the Church of the Apostolic Succession. So how can you understand the attitude? I think he stood between the Church of Apostolic Succession, the Church of Law, and also the Church of the Holy Spirit, some kind of idealistic, the church in the heaven. So,
well, thank you for your question. I think the keyword to answer to your question is Corpus Christi, the body of Christ. In maybe 1930 or in that era, the Roman court some theologians say that the church is the body of Christ. That is very old idea. I was St. Augustine say that, but the idea re-evaluated in that era. So in this idea, the individual church is rejected because the top of the church pope and the or some part of the church as a laity connected. But the connection is based on Holy Spirit or sorry, what in English? Full of existential sense, not Benjamin church, hierarchy church. So I think to stress the Holy Spirit or to stress the individual feeling is not sorry 両立する with the Catholic Church system. Yeah. Especially in Yoshimitsu.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So Newman was first in the Anglican Church and then converted to Catholicism.
Yeah.
So Anglican Church was born as a state church, right?
Yeah.
It's the Church of England, which detached from the Catholic Church. And I think you can see in Newman's writing this open to universal dimension of Catholicism, right? Catholic Church claims to be universal, so not connected to a state, to temporal power. Do you see the same movement in Yoshimitsu, in his conversion to Catholicism? So the opening to a dimension which overcomes the boundary of Japan.
Thank you, very interesting question. But maybe the timing after the conversion, he do not have such idea. The reason why he removed the non-church group is only his bad feeling to subjectivity or to aggression. But in 1940s, the overcoming the 15 years lost started. Yoshimitsu got such feeling and such idea. In 1940s, he always used not state or not the nation is the part of the politics, part of the world. The most important is spirituality, and spirituality is not controlled by the state. So that is very universal idea, and maybe much to do with Newman or other Catholic theologians. But maybe he do not have that. But he got such idea after he converted to Catholic, I think.
So any questions from our colleagues who is attending by Zoom? Is there any questions from you, Hoizumi or Nakamura-san? If you have any questions, then please.
Thank you very much for asking me that question.
Thank you.
My name is Sora Hoizumi. I'm a student in Tohoku University, and from Professor Fongara Enrico invite me to this conference. Thank you very much for your good presentation. I am also a researcher of the Yoshimitsu Yoshihiko's thoughts, and I would like to ask you a question. The states and the church for Yoshimitsu. I think that the Yoshimitsu also think the church and the states problem, but he did not write this topic directly. I think how do we how do we how do we interpret or how do we understand his idea of state or and church? Sorry, my question is the simple. His idea, I think there is no paper, no sources of this the source church, the topic church and states. And do you think the idea for understanding the topics, political and religion or states or church? I also search. I also find how to understand his idea. Sorry, this is my question.
Thank you for your question. That's very interesting, and I'm also interested in the theme, but very difficult. Well, my answer is that I have two answers. The first answer is that he do not talk directly by conference or by published book, but in Catholic periodicals, sometimes he talk direct comment on church. For example, he says that church should not be national. This is very direct sentence. So if periodical titled Koe, in Koe, some direct comment. This is the first answer. And the second answer, this is maybe more important. As you said, most of his comments are not preserved. So if we want to know his real idea, the method of oral history is very important. Oral history is one method of history. For example, the president husband or girl or friend and interview and take tape. And some copy of Yoshimitsu talk on him and what he said during the war. And some of the interview are published as in the Yoshimitsu Zenshu Atogaki. But this is very difficult point that is whether their comment is right or is it real Yoshimitsu's feeling. Oral history is very difficult because each person has their position and they try to keep their position. And they like Yoshimitsu, so they try to protect Yoshimitsu. So when we use oral history, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. When we use the method of oral history, we also collect negative information on the scene. But maybe on Yoshimitsu, not on Yoshimitsu, Iwashita, or Endo Shusaku, or people, those people speak on them, friends or copy of them. So it's very difficult to collect negative information on them. So that's very one-sided story. I think, of course, I like Yoshimitsu and I like Endo very much, but as a Catholic layman, that is very comfortable for me. But as a student or as a scholar, that is lack of creditability, I think.
Mhm.
So I think what scholar who study Catholic theologians should do is not only collect source from only in the Catholic Church or who have good feeling to the church, but also who criticize the theologian, criticize the church. I think that's my question. That's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answer. For me, I would like to find the personal letters related to Iwashita Soichi or Tanaka Kotaro, etc. For the Yoshimitsu researches, we have to find the documents or published book resources for understand his idea. Thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
So,
Almost, there's a couple more minutes, but
questions?
if not, we want to close.
Questions? So, I think we only spend many long times for discussion. So thank you very much, Dr. KIUCHI, for presentation today. It was very interesting and gave us some many insight for understanding how the Western theologians was accepted and understood by the Japanese scholars, who was very important person at the time. And I think today we have a time to listen to the talk by Dr. KIUCHI, and I think it is good for us because it is a very good starting point for the relation between the NRC and the Nanjing University, I think. So I will, if possible, we also have to invite some young scholars who has graduated or who is studying at the graduate school, and then we can construct some combination, some tunnels, some pipe between the Shingen and the university. I think this is one of the possibilities. So also in that sense, I also appreciate you, Dr. KIUCHI, for your contribution to today's talk. And I hope that we can keep on invite some of the scholars to our institute. So thank you for your talk and thank you for coming. Thank you for all.